Welcome to Lecture 11. In Lecture 11 we continue with our topic action. So let me start with a little recap, just 30 seconds, and a description of what comes next. The overall question for this part of the course is, what is the mark that distinguishes actions? And in asking this question, we're addressing what Frankfurt called the problem of action. He says the problem is to explicate the contrast between what an agent does and things that merely happen to her. That's the idea. Now, it's tempting to think at the outset that there might be a simple answer to our question, and so that the question is not really a problem at all. By the way, Steve, what is a problem? Well, in philosophy, a problem, Steve, is a question to which some difficulty is attached. So one response might be to try to say, look, there isn't really a problem here. The question is kind of trivial. So for example, when it comes to distinguishing actions from mere events, we might try to say, look, the distinction is just that actions have some particular kind of kinematic or dynamic properties. It's really to do with the forces involved or the pattern of movements. But that answer doesn't seem very promising, because if you compare a case of intentionally falling with a case of accidentally falling, they're very difficult to distinguish kinematically. It seems unlikely that we would be able to come up with a principled way of separating the actions from events that merely happen to you just by appeal to kinematic features. Famously, in this example, one of the fallings was entirely accidental. The film was supposed to go a different way. There was quite a big accident, but the producers decided to go with that and just use the accident as part of the film. Another thought that you might have, so putting aside the idea that we can get kinematics here, you might think, well, look, we can distinguish actions from things that are mere events, things that merely happen to you, by appeal to the idea of coordination. Actions are just patterns of bodily movements that are coordinated in a certain way. Attractive idea. After all, it doesn't involve appeal to any mental states, there's no complexity, and that would indeed show the question, what distinguishes actions? It's not really a problem at all. It's quite an easy question to answer. Just appeal to coordination. The problem, though, is that there are many cases, swinging on a rope, being swung on a rope is one of them. Ooh. Ooh, that was close. Where it's very hard to tell. It's very hard to tell whether a person is performing an action or being swung by the rope. But in both cases, what you'll see is highly coordinated patterns of bodily movement. Coordination, of course, being provided by the way that the body, different joints are organised, together with the structure of the rope, and of course the attachment between the two. So coordination seems to be a feature which is common both to things that merely happen to you and to actions. And it's not always the case that your actions are more coordinated than things that merely happen to you. So it does look like this question, what's the mark that distinguishes actions, that really does look like a problem insofar as none of the relatively straightforward ways of trying to answer it seem to stand up against possible counterexamples. So what we saw last week in Lecture 10 was what I'm calling the standard story, what Frankfurt calls a causal theory. The idea is this: the mark that distinguishes your actions is intention. Those events which are appropriately related to intentions that you have are actions, things that you do. Other things that happen in your life, the other events which make up your life, they merely happen to you. So it's the role of intention in causing the events that makes them actions. Now that, I'm saying, is the standard story, or as Frankfurt says, causal theory. Now, I don't like to call it a theory because I think that as a philosopher I use the term theory to mean a theory. But what we've just seen is much more like a story than a theory, because after all, there's no prospect of generating predictions about future observations from it, for example. It doesn't seem to have any of the sort of coherence that a theory might have as well. Nevertheless, I'm happy to go with Frankfurt and say, well, it counts as a causal theory for his purposes. The interesting thing for us about Frankfurt is that he wants to show, first of all, that any such theory is wrong, irrespective of the particular details of it, and secondly, that there is an alternative approach to thinking about action. So Frankfurt says this: according to causal theories, in my terms the standard story, the essential difference between events of the two types. Which two types? Oh, he means actions on the one hand, things that merely happen to you on the other. So the essential difference between those two is to be found in their prior causal histories. A pattern of joint displacements and bodily configurations is an action if and only if it results from antecedents of a certain kind. And where Frankfurt says antecedents of a certain kind, he means intentions. So let's take a look. What is Frankfurt's objection to what I'm calling the standard story? How good is the objection? Does it work? And what's the alternative that Frankfurt proposes? Let's find out.